Okay.
Has everyone got the paper balls ready? Oh, sorry.
Okay, let's get this started and just ignore the back row. For those who don't know, what's that? Yeah. For those who don't know me, my name's Giannis. I'm a postgrad student here as well as the rest of us. That's how we got here. I'll be speaking today on speaking and body language during your presentations. To give you a bit of background with my profession, I've done a fair few presentations in a court context, so a lot more formal environments, while here we tend to have a bit more of a casual environment. How should we say, the interrogations can still be just as extreme at the end, depending on who your audience is. So what I'm going to cover off on is just some real basic rules as to how to get through, show some confidence, get through your topic, and also what to do when everything just falls apart on you, especially when you start getting those tricky questions you really don't know how to answer, you're just desperately pedaling away, trying to get through it without everything just falling apart. So, let's start off with a couple of very important tips. Rule number one, I'm going without slides. Why? Because I'm not comfortable with slides. I always mess them up, so I stay away from them. I try to speak from the heart more than from a board. So, whiteboard marker, whiteboard, hopefully never breaks down, and we go from there. Rule number one, energy. I learnt this from watching a lot of local bands in Melbourne. First things first you notice is that you can go to the worst gig around or see the worst speaker, but if they're out there giving it everything, giving it their energy, you can forgive the fact they're talking complete rubbish and you really don't want to be there. Number two is eye contact. Try to make eye contact with every single person in the room during your presentation at some point. Why do I mention that? Again, it gives confidence, it gives a bit of an understanding, it also gives a bit of a bond between the two of you. From that, you can also continue on, it builds trust. Now what you may have noticed then is when I'm changing the whiteboard, I completely shut up. Now, when you're doing a presentation, that 4 or 5 seconds feels like an eternity, and you think the audience is fidgeting around. I won't ask the question, but ask yourself, did that feel like a long time or I had my back turned? Because when you go to a lecture and someone's doing these ones and I talk around like this and blah, 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 you can't hear me, you don't know what they're doing. It shows that maybe I'm not really thinking about my audience, I'm just trying to get through this thing. So, let's go with the next important thing, your speech itself. I call it 6B. I learned this about 10 years ago at a public presentation conference. It's all about warming up your vocal cords. It's also very good and specific to the English language in terms of phonetics. So if English is not your first language, it's a great little cheat. 6 B's. The big black bug bled black blood. You say that to yourself a few times, nice and quiet. The big black bug bled black blood. The big black bug bled black blood. Your mouth starts to warm up. And then you start to animate a bit. The big black bug bled black blood. Suddenly you're warmed up, your mouth's moving, bit of confidence, bit of adrenaline even, and you're off. Hands. Why do I mention that? I'm standing here at the lectern, I'm being a bit, what's the term, monotonous maybe, a bit dull, a bit academic, a bit Carmen-esque. No, don't say that, turn the camera off there. But if I use my hands, I can animate anything. Random selection of Bayesian variables in a corpus. Ask any person, that's the most boring topic you can think of. Animate it a bit, get out there, you can get at least add some enthusiasm. Okay. PowerPoint. Never read off a PowerPoint slide. Rule number one, you'll have your back turned. We already discussed that. Rule number two, your slides are your narrative. Why are you there? Just get off the stage and flick through the slides if that's going to happen. Use them as a way to get your topic, to summarise what you're saying, but your audience is here to listen to this, not to that. Avoid jargon. That's a tough one, but every time I hear, how to put this, when I used to work in the private sector, anytime someone told me they were coming to me with a solution, I shut down because I knew that meant they were buying time that was rubbish. When they're talking about a paradigm shift or a new innovation, forget about it. Keep it simple. If your audience doesn't understand, maybe we've got a problem, but to be honest, if you keep it simple and just move on, 2 thumbs up. Use a narrative. What do I mean by that? I opened up with energy. I moved on to other things, and when I finish, I'll try to wrap it back around and try to bring it through. What does that say to your audience? They're listening at the start, they might switch off in the middle, and they'll come back at the finish. If you've got those two covered, it shows that you are on topic the whole time. It's a bit more professional. So, let's move on to what happens now when the good stuff goes bad. Rule number one, I'm halfway through my point and, oh God, what's happened? Okay, that was 5 seconds. Felt like a bit awkward, but we got through it, we can move on. Let's keep going. 2, if you're in trouble, keep going. Don't stop for too long. If your PowerPoint slides shut down, if I'm up here now and all of a sudden my monitor's showing good, oh crud, what am I going to do? I might do the old peek, help us out here mate. I want to come over here, I want to keep talking. Keep the flow going, just keep moving. It looks professional, you know what you're doing, you've rehearsed this, it's all great, I'm smiling, I'm having a great time. Pete's desperately ripping cables out of the back trying to figure what's going on. Yeah, or swearing, or both. Now, you're 3/4 of the way through, your presentation's gone great, and all of a sudden Lee walks in the room and asks you a really obscure question of elliptic curve cryptography, and you're here talking about data selection. Oh God, what am I going to do? Everyone's looking at me. Great question, Lee. I'm going to write that one down. Remind me to come back to that one at the end. We're just going to set it on topic. Again, I encourage questions during presentations. Some people don't like it because that says they break their flow. Personally, I love them because they can also be a pointer. I'm rubbishing along here about Monte Carlo tree search, blah, 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 blah. And someone goes, sorry, what is Monte Carlo tree search? Oh, crikey, I've made a big blunder here, let's step back. But if it's also off topic, so I don't want to do it, great, I'll take that on notice. We'll come back one, please remind me later on. It also gives you a few great seconds while you're writing there, what the heck am I going to do? And you can think of something and fudge your way through it at the end. Bubble, when things turn to crap, smile, go with energy, 2 thumbs up. Thanks. Never. Yes.
Yeah, you were stating though to avoid jargon, but wouldn't you pick your audience?
Absolutely, but never return to it. So, and actually, very good point there.
Thank you.
Always repeat the question. Half the time the audience won't have heard it, but it also buys you 10 seconds while I'm desperately going on the audience. Yeah, but if your audience knows what that jargon is and what it means, they don't need to know it. We understand it, we can keep it going. Sometimes to me, you go to a presentation and it's almost like they're using it as a crutch. They'll talk about a paradigm shift, whatever. It's sort of like I'm propping myself up because I don't really understand the topic. Ditch that, just talk about the stuff that your audience understands. You don't need the fancies, leave the frills. If you want to be fancy, go to one of those motivational workshops. They tell you can be empowered. If you just want to get your message across, keep it simple. Keep it simple, keep it simple. And you'll be fine.
So I think there's a difference between jargon and like buzzwords. So
yes.
Paradigm shift is a buzzword. Jargon might be it's specific to the topic that you're talking about, and it might be a word that you need to use that lay people don't understand. If that's when you pick your audience, and it's perfectly fine to use those sort of terms.
Yes, if you have to use it, define it, but don't just keep coming back to it every 10 seconds because it's your...
I noticed you got your offsider supporting you here, but you're going...
I always have 2 plans.
Okay.
Always have a backup. Yeah, my other plan.
Include that as part of the rules.
I have a plan. Yeah, a very good trick as well is with the questions one. Always have a plan for your first question.
Yeah.
And you can buy a bit of time. It's anyway, we're out of time, guys. Let's move it on now. Let's go get some lunch. We're off. That's the best way to do it.
I actually do suggest that to people when they're speaking, because if you finish your talk and you think it's really interesting and there's no questions whatsoever, it might be because you explained it absolutely perfectly and there's no questions, but it's probably more likely that it's a boring topic.
Yeah.
Everyone drifted off halfway through.
Yeah.
So if no one's asking a question, it can reflect bad on you, so that's when you definitely want to have one of your mates sitting in the crowd to ask
Yeah,
something.
and definitely don't speak when the lunch arrives. Which is a bad sign there, but yeah. Oh,
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
yes, state your name and your question.
You know who I am.
What was his name?
Have you got... It doesn't matter what my name is. It's often the case, without mentioning specific situations that I've been involved in, it's often the case that with the audience there are 1 or 2 people who are clearly interested, and the remainder of the audience are not so much.
Yeah.
And you tend to, it's a natural thing to talk to people who you know are interested in topic you tend to focus on them. Have you got tips as to how to sort of deal with that when 90% of the people are kind of...
It's what you're comfortable with. I don't know if you notice, I subconsciously tend to not look, if I'm in trouble, I'll look for the people who I know are into it and supportive. If I'm sort of winging it and I'm feeling good, I'll talk to people who I don't really know that well. I don't know if you notice, I actually didn't look across to Pete that often during the presentation compared to some of the other people in the room. That's weird. Simply because I know he knows this topic because we spoke about it before.
Yeah.
So if I started going bad here, I might look across, you get a bit of a smile, people like acting like you're into it, great, bang, energy's back.
Yeah.
Now look across at that bloke in the back row just seems to have switched off after the first two questions and just sort of, is planning out the lunch and he's got back in his office or something like that. Yeah, or behind him. To my mind, I try to just, again, I don't necessarily veer the narrative towards them, but I will start to use a bit of the body language and also just a bit of the eye contact, because if nothing else, if the person's completely ignoring you and you have to make eye contact with them during the session, it can also be a bit of, oh, hang on a minute, I'm being watched as well. So it forces a bit of, not necessarily interaction, but subliminal interaction, we'll call it. Daniel, thank you.
We know what your name is. Oh, is Peter getting up there too? Oh, God, I thought it was finished.
Instead, we're on Walsall back here.
Is there?
Yeah.
I was excited. Ooh.
You're one of those tough ones.
Like you say, whiteboards can't break, and then this is one of those ones that can actually break.
Actually, yes, sometimes
It's the one type of
distracting.
whiteboard in the world.
I'll just use the wall then. Worry about it later.
Let's see how I go with this little mess. Okay. I changed the topic of my slides because it did say how to simplify your slides, and then every single slide said, don't do this, and it sounded very negative. So I thought if I just have the first slide is negative, then the rest of them can be positive and we can all be happy. Let me give it this full screen. Okay, so I've been to, firstly, do not take all of these as the golden truth. Of course, everybody has their own styles, and like Giannis was mentioning, do what you're comfortable with. So if you find that you're much more comfortable disregarding everything I say, and you feel it makes you bigger, feel free to do that. I've been to many, many talks at non-academic conferences, just at work, and I've seen all sorts of great talks with all sorts of variations on how they do their slides. This is my sort of summary of a lot of the things that I think makes a good presentation. But it of course depends on the individual person. Whoa, scroll up. Okay, so Giannis covered this, reading directly from the slides. Especially that vocalization thing, whereas if I turn around over here and start talking and I don't have a microphone on, you may be able to hear it because it's bouncing off this wall over here. But also it just is not professional at all, so I won't keep talking about that because Giannis has already mentioned it. Showing everything at once. So you might have something really, really complex, and the reason I bring this up is because I went to a confirmation talk here, and someone was presenting these really complex equations to do with, can't remember what they were to do with, but they actually presented them in a really nice fashion. What they did, let's first take an example from my own confirmation over here. So it's going to load up the slides, if it ever loads up. This is a flowchart that I was working on for my presentation, and it's a little bit complex. This here is the title of my confirmation presentation, and I knew that it was way over complex. And the first thing I said was, don't worry too much about the title, we'll get to that in a minute. Now I'll show you how I dealt with it. If you have something particularly complex that you'd like to show, use the exact same flowchart. Now, a lot of people don't like that death by PowerPoint when you have individual bullet points coming along, but if you have something relatively complex to talk about, I could just point, I could have the whole thing and just point and wave around, but you can just make sure that the thing that you're talking about at this point in time is the one that pops up. Now I'm going to talk about that section over there, and it becomes very clear which bits you're talking about, rather than starting from here and then trying to point to the right thing. I could use a mouse, I don't know, it's a little tricky to do that. Same thing with the presentation title. What I did was I got my title here. Without reading off the slide, I put some stuff there for people to read if they wanted to, but I can give my own definition of what this section of the title is. Then I can talk about what the hell a possible scenario is, and then I can talk about what intelligently generating means. I can break it down, and I can use these tools to highlight the bits that I want people to emphasize at any particular time. rather than me pointing and making sure that you see exactly what I'm pointing at. Jumping back through slides, it's quite often that you will have some sort of presentation here, you've got a diagram you want to show, and whoa, look at this, did you guys see that? That's right. And then I'll jump back to the previous slide again to show what's going on. Oh, look at this, they actually changed the numbers around so that it goes up and then down, and they're completely lying. And then when I continue my talk, I have to go back through the slide that I've already been to, right? A lot of people feel like if you copy that slide and then put it again further in the slide, it's sort of like denormalizing your talk, and then you have to, if you make changes to the first one, you have to go make changes to the other one again. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go from the start now. What I've done is, jumping back through your slides, hey, look at this presentation. Can you see these numbers over here? That's right. Exactly the same slide, next one over there, so I don't have to jump back and forth, because I practiced this talk and I know that I'm going to have to refer back to that picture again. Practicing. I've spoken to people from various conferences. Some people say, I was talking to this one gentleman and he was saying that he likes to wing it purely because if he practices his talk 5 times, it gets really boring. And then he loses all that energy that he would have had. And it actually works for him. So I watched his talk and he was really, really good at what he was doing. But most people, it's quite normal to get nervous when you get up in front of people and talk. And then as Giannis was saying, you might forget what you're doing, and you might trip over. And that 5-second pause and you go, oh geez, what was I working on? If you practice your talk quite a lot, you can jump straight back into it. You have less of those pauses. If somebody wants to ask a question during the talk, you'll feel more confident taking questions during the talk because you can carry on where you left off. You don't have to rely on this one stream of thought that you're going without breaking. This one over here, record yourself when you practice. It's really, really horrible to listen to yourself talk. I can't think of anything more awkward. But if you do it, then you will know that the things that you're doing that are wrong. I speak far too fast. I mumble quite a lot. When I listen to myself talk, I can notice that. I mean, everyone tells me that anyway, but I really, really get a sense for it when I actually listen to myself talk. And practicing is the only way that I can fix that. The reason I say it often takes less time in preparing is because what I used to do, like maybe when I was leaving high school and starting uni and I was doing a presentation, is I'll sit down and I'll spend ages crafting these perfect slides and I'll hardly practice the talk and I'll just practice it at the end. And I spent so long working on the slides, whereas if I practice the talk first, I might just write down a few notes, I'll go out to the grass downstairs and I'll just start talking to myself from top to bottom and I'll get lost 100 times and I'll keep changing and chopping and moving around and eventually I will have settled on something. And then I can sit down and the slides just write themselves because I know exactly what I want to talk about, I know exactly what pictures I want to put up on my slides and so forth. So I actually spend less time working on my talk in total. Numbering the slides, this one is purely for the confirmation seminar here. If you're at a conference, you're not going to be handing out slides for everybody, right? But we know that in a confirmation presentation, at the end, people are going to be asking questions about your slides. Right? What that means is they're going to say, can you please go back to that slide that had the graph about the, and you've had like 13 graphs, you're not going to know which one they're talking about. Let them say a page number and you're there. Which comes to this as well. So again, we know that people are going to be asking questions at the end. What we don't want to do is we don't want to be jumping back through all of the slides because the first question is always about the research questions. Without a shadow of a doubt, you're going to be going back to the very beginning of your slide, and then the next question would be about your conclusions and your timeline, so you have to go all the way through to the front again. So if you have a tool that supports it, I'm not sure if this, I couldn't get it working in the Google presentation there, but here is my slide, my presentation again for my confirmation. Last slide. I suppose while I'm here I should also mention last slide should always have something on it, not just end of presentation at the top. So your questions or comments. If somebody wants to go back to the start, okay, let's go back to the, okay, this tool, I press I go up, I can choose the one that I want to go to, and then they can sort of help guide me, and then I can get to exactly where I need to be. Alright? I think that is all I have to talk about. That's it. So just a couple of small little pointers. Hopefully a lot of them are common sense. Like I said, different people speak to different things. I've seen very good presentations of people who have 300 slides, 1 word per slide, 1 picture per slide maybe, and they can fly through 5 seconds per slide, and it's the most entertaining talk and the most interesting talk. I've also seen people do that style and it completely falls flat on its face and doesn't work. But hopefully some of those pointers in there, if you follow them, you can minimise the risk of stuffing it up completely. Thank you. Maybe use twos up now. You'll have to start eventually.
Good afternoon, I'm Varsha. My talk is not about not more about speaking and presentation and slides and that kind of stuff. It's not entertaining at all. And it's mainly about how to connect your research questions, how to identify the gaps and what your contributions are, how you connect them all together, come back to the big question, and it's more about how we can connect those dots and present it in a way that, especially with confirmations, usually the panel is going to ask us, okay, you're talking about this particular question, or you're talking about this particular contribution, how is it connected back to the research question? Which gap is it filling? Which gap is it addressing? So that kind of thing, you always have to connect it back to the question. That is what I'm going to focus about today. And I'm going to ignore all the things that Yanis and Peter are going to do because I'm not good at that. So I'm going to look at the screen, I'm going to look at the slides and talk. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the literature review, the identifying the gaps, and the research questions, and how we connect all of these, and then draw a conclusion and talk about the contributions. And when it comes to literature review, I'm not going to focus too much today on it because we all do the literature review in our own areas. We identify the gaps. I start from the gaps, although I've got that to show the logical sequence of things that we are all going to do. For research gaps, basically we try and look at the pointers that identify the gaps, and this is something that I made up. We look at the questions that are not addressed in the literature. Sometimes the questions are addressed, but they do not give any conclusive evidence. So these are kind of primary contributions that we can make when we look at the literature. Right? Identifying the gaps, these gaps are the primary contribution that we make. And when it comes to secondary contributions, could be methodology being insufficient to test the hypothesis. Sometimes you find this, and I'll come to an example for that later on. And sometimes we have data limitations and application to different data sets or domain. The research that the literature that we would be going through might be looking at a particular domain or a particular data set. Maybe the data set is not large enough. Maybe we could apply to another domain. So these kind of things we could look at and identify the gaps. And what type of gaps can you normally see? It could be resource related, something to do with the advancement in technology, tools, or it could be methodology related. So when I can talk for myself about my research. It's a cross-disciplinary research in IT and finance. So for me, the resource related is applying machine learning to finance. How do I apply machine learning to finance? That could be resource related. And the methodology wise, again talking about my research, and I'm trying to keep it very generic here. I'm not specifically going to talk about my research, but more general. When I was looking at a particular variable, the variable was trying to predict something, right? I'm not talking about the jargon here. So a particular variable is predicting something. If the literature is talking about that variable and predicting something and talking about the impact of that prediction, I might go into detail and study if this variable is sufficient for the prediction. This variable that they are talking about could just be an observed variable. There could also be some unobserved variables there. So when I'm talking about unobserved variables, then I have to study the impact of that unobserved variable on the prediction. Right? So when I'm talking about unobserved variable, again when I'm trying to contribute towards the literature, trying to focus on the unobserved variable, this becomes secondary as well as primary. Because secondary because it's methodology related, I could develop a new methodology trying to incorporate this unobserved variable into it, also try and contribute primarily, because I'm going to revisit the questions once again, revisit the research question and try and address from the beginning, right? And sometimes there would also be issues that we cannot address. Sometimes it could be because of lack of understanding, or it's not practical to do it. And I've just put it on the slide, but usually we all focus on the blue part of it, the resources and methodology related gaps. We generally do not focus on the issues that are really complicated. So I can talk about an example of, time machine or traveling into future or traveling back, and I've just read an article recently about that it's possible to travel in time machine into future, but it's not possible to travel backwards. Something like that. Complicated, we need to have the understanding first before we start something, right? Things that are very complicated, not much of research literature is available. Those things I'm not addressing here, because those are not the ones that we commonly address. The commonly addressed ones are the first two ones. And then coming to the research questions. Now once we identified the gaps, we frame the questions. So again, when we identify the gap, it may be possible or may not be possible to address everything that is out there, right? We scope, we create our boundaries. This is the area, this is the particular area that I'm going to focus at, and these are the questions that I'm going to focus at. So we list those questions and relate it back to, connect it back to the gaps that we have identified. That's very important to give a bigger picture to the audience. We identify the gaps, we know the research questions, we know what contributions we're going to make, but if they're not connected, our audience cannot understand the bigger picture, the whole picture like we do. So always at every stage, connecting back to the question, connecting back to the source. That's what is easy for everybody else to understand. And then coming to the contribution, if you have more than one contribution, just list them and then connect them to the research question. Now these are the three questions that I have, and these are the three possible contributions. So this one refers to this question, and that question refers back to this gap that I'm filling. So that kind of connection is very important. And when we fill these gaps, we draw new conclusions, because we have identified the gap, we have filled in with our inputs, and this we are deriving a new conclusion out of it. This becomes a contribution now. I'm going to conclude, and this is something that I found very interesting, and you could go through this. This is a recommended reading, Understanding Research by Lawrence Newman. And I'm going to wrap up now and hand over to Dewey. If you have any questions for me. I do not have any references put here because it's something that I made up. But at every stage we need to, if we refer to something, obviously we all know that we have to put the references in there. So I'm not going to put that in there because it's all something that I made up.
Would you guys be sending your slides to us? Would it be possible?
I can send mine. I'm not sure.
Would you be able to send yours as well?
Yes, we will just upload them together, as well as the video that we recording. So it's not only the slides, but we will also give you the recording. Although it's just unprofessional recording.
You call me unprofessional?
No, totally fine. More unprofessional than
Professional.
Was it a professional?
Alright. When you give an oral presentation, the time will be 20 minutes for the presentation and another 20 minutes for the questions. So you have to prepare. For both. You can just only prepare for your presentation, but you also have to prepare about the question itself, which is like sometimes it was so scary. I remember during my confirmation, there is one of the panel just like bombarded me with the questions, a lot of questions. So like I'm feeling like oh my god, really. So yeah, prepare yourself to answer the questions. That's one of part of your preparation thing. Okay, so when you have an oral presentation, you may expect these three kinds of questions. The first one is the good questions. It's easy. This is the easy questions, and maybe it will come up from one of the audience that you know well. Let's say I give a presentation here. Prasha is next, sit in the same cubicle as me, so she know what I'm doing, so she will give me a good, easy question. So, yeah. And the next one is difficult questions, something that you may not expect it. And then the third one is irrelevant questions. Janice already gave a very good example before. That's about the cryptography. So,
Oh, yeah.
You talk about something and then suddenly that totally come and then ask about the cryptography, which is irrelevant at all. You have to expect this kind of questions. That will be there in any occasion. So, all right, next. Oops. Yeah. The rule of thumb is be humble. We all know that we are the expert of our thesis. Nobody else will be as good as us, as good as me, about my thesis. So you know well about your thesis, of course. But please also keep in mind that the panels are more experienced than you. So, doesn't mean that you can't defend yourself because you know well about your thesis, but just respect the panels because they have more experience, they have more knowledge, and so on, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. So some tips. The first tip is keep calm and confident because you are the expert. Nobody knows about your thesis. Even if you cite the wrong paper, nobody will know. Trust me. I mean, and except if you make a wrong definition, and it's just like a general definition, so everybody will know about it. But the detail of your thesis, the citation and so on, nobody will care. And then the next one is listen carefully to the questions. Just take your time. If you don't understand about the questions, just repeat the questions. Do you mean these things and so on? So the third one is be honest. So if you do not know about something, say that at this point I do not know about that. I will read about that later and I'll come back to you. And if you have time, I will be very happy to discuss it with you. That's the best thing to do. So never pretend that you know all the things if you do not know. Just be honest. The fourth one is try to deflect loaded question. If the question is very difficult, and let's say in one question there are 3 different areas actually. So you can just say, okay, let me just ask the first part of the questions, and then the second part of the question, the third part of the question. So, and it will give you some times, like what Jenny said, the delay time. So just try to make it simpler, and then just try to address it one by one. The next one is don't pass the blame. Never ever say like, why you use this method, and then you just answer like because my supervisor says so. It's just like oh come on, is this your thesis or your supervisor's thesis? Even if it's true, don't tell the panel. So the last one is avoid defensive answer. You are the expert, but it's good to say like yes, you are correct. Yes. Yeah, that theory is good, but maybe we have another way to look at it and so on. But never ever just to be defensive. No, my method is the best one. Don't say something like that. So this is some phrase. I said good phrases, but I'm not sure. I also made up some, and I also picked some from the website. So if it's good question, you can say like I'm glad you asked that question, which is true. You're glad that somebody asked that question because you know the answer, and then you can say like that's a good point because I know the answer, right? And the next one is if it's difficult question, just delay. Just let's say you look at on your slides or just pause for seconds. Just try to get your mind, to get something from your mind, but keep calm and keep confident, and just put it in your mind that yes, I can answer this question. And if you know that it might be related to you can just say like based on my initial literature, based on my literature review so far, or based on my initial experiments, which means like there is an open window there. We are not saying that we are the best one, we know everything. It's just like at this point, this is what I know. But we don't know. Maybe in the next month we will read another paper and we know more about it. So the next, or we can also say, I'm sorry. At this point, I don't know about it. And yeah, and so on. And then the next one is if it's relevant suggestion, somewhat relevant suggestion. We are not sure yet though. So you can say like, thank you. I will read more about it, and I will discuss it with my supervisor. If it's suitable for my case, I will use it. Still, it's open-ended. And then the last one is if it's irrelevant. So you can say, I agree with you. This is a good theory, but there are lots of ways to look at the problem. And I choose this way. I choose my way. And what's the reason? Like since this has this and so on. In the preparation, first, when you do the mock presentation, please invite non-experts listener. Just ask as many as friends you have. And if you have non-IT person, that will be great. Because they will just come up with a question that you're not expect before. You never expect before. Because that person will have a clear mind, clear view. So that's a very good one. And the second one is prepare extra slides based on those questions during the mock presentation. You don't have to change your presentation. Just prepare extra slides. So in case somebody asks about it, you already have the slide. So you don't have to go back and forth on your slides. And then the third one, the most important one is expect the unexpected question. All the unexpected questions will be there. So don't worry, just keep calm and confident. If you want to read more, these are some websites that I found it quite useful. Yeah, maybe it will help you as well. All right, thank you.
It's about the mock presentations. That's what we're all here for. So whoever wants to make any presentation, just announce and you can have a lunchtime seminar. We also make a free lunch. That's the best part, free lunch.
Some don't advertise it, just get the sandwiches and
Just go. So we go for questions or something?
Yeah.
Only difficult ones.
yeah.
That should deflect them. And make sure you blame your supervisor. Obviously your supervisor. Hang on, so many people here are not...
No, it's on the yarn.
Who's this man is...
Oh, and Dora.
There's Dora. So who do you supervise in this group? How
Just
many?
Giannis and Dora.
Okay.
Successfully or just on paper?
No, I didn't ask about that part.
Successfully.
Just rule number one, always challenge your supervisor. It makes you really popular.
Well, in a presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to rewrite all my punchlines when you walked in. So.
Many of them have.
How many of
Everything
you
in color.
have not done the presentation yet?
So
Is this your first one? The first one?
Next one, and then the one after, 2 months after, 3 months after.
So now can I ask the
Mike's got one too.
question?
Oh,
I'll do my not reading it.
So you've got to do your first
Yeah.
one.
So
Okay.
you want to go first?
No, I just want to ask my next question.
I just started
that
April
what
of
is
this
really
year.
the
Okay, so April
presentation
of
about?
March.
Because from your talk and so much from your talk as well, I see that, well, it is about basically making your research socially accepted, which, you know, that's part of the communication and all that. But like being an HDR, you know, postgrad student, I think it's essentially more about what you're doing. I'm not denying that the presenting is a very important factor, but I'd like to know that perhaps the panel, what are they really looking in to be candidate in a presentation? What are they really assessing in? Because I haven't done my. I'm looking at
And shut the door. You see the one as he goes through the wall.
Supervisor shake hole.
I guess.
Well, that could be a good thing for a next talk.
Everyone's hungry.
No, what we're trying to do is trying to
I'm
make
not deflecting, I'm just thinking that.
But you're right though, that the actual presentation skills part of it is a very small part of it. But it's, well, in terms of assessment, it's crucial to get the message across, but it's the message that's the key part, it's the content, of course. So yeah, but you can't get that across to the panel if you're not,
Yeah.
if you're not presenting it.
So the name confirmation gives it away a little bit in that you have an idea for a thesis, you've been working on it for a year, and they want to confirm that they think you are doing something which is worthwhile and they'll like you to keep working on. So make sure that you're not out of scope, make sure that you're on track, you think you know what you're talking about. Not necessarily you think you know what you're talking about, like you're the best in the world at it, but that you have a clear idea about what you're going to be working towards. So they want to confirm that what you're doing is worthwhile pursuing for the next 2 years.
I guess perhaps the reason I'm asking this question is, which is I'm glad it's approved, is well, you know, I don't think in research or in science there is ever, well, basically it's again a big claim, but I mean, we are specializing and working at some part anyways, and then we need to perhaps demonstrate that we are understanding what we are doing, but then with the unexpected questions, if it comes from the general audience, yes, I would expect that, but would there be like unexpected questions from the panels? And if there is, I think it would be, well, they are not just throwing a question, they'd like to assess something because of making that question. So that's...
And it's not a defence of anything, it's not an adversarial process. So the panel generally is asking questions by way of suggestion.
Sure.
Suggesting in most cases. Yeah.
One
it's
thing-
not adversarial.
One thing I can contribute to that, because I think I've got some of the most unexpected questions from the panel, because my research is in cryptography. Thanks, guys.
But your research is what?
It's in cryptography, network security. I think one of the thing that you need to get from the presentations today from all the speakers is that your main idea for confirmation is to get your concept out there. Now, a lot of times it happens that when you're doing your first year, you spend first 7 months trying to come up with an idea, and then you spend the last couple of months just scrambling for resources to say what's the background. And a lot of times you find yourself putting in literature review that's not relevant to your research at all. And when you go to the panel, what the panels that they're actually looking at is they understand your concept and they understand your literature review, but they don't connect the two. So they ask you a question saying, well, you're presenting an idea, you're presenting a literature review, but how exactly, like, how does it link up together? So that's what they want you to do. So you need to actually look at your research and then say, this is my concept, this is the relevant literature, and then this is what I'm planning on actually doing. Sure. So when the panel actually asks you a question which is challenging, which is you think is irrelevant, that comes across as only as one thing, as in you've not communicated your idea well enough for them to understand it. Okay. Right? Because if they understand it, they will never ask you a challenging question. They'll only give you suggestions saying, well, have you considered this, have you considered that? Sure. But if you come across the panel which asks you questions saying, but what about this? Then you've not communicated your entire idea to them correctly. Yeah. So that's normally one way to look at it.
Which is what fascist slides are for.
Yeah. Sometimes you have people like Peter who just want to heckle you. That's a different question.
I'm putting my hand up.
Usually you send your proposal to them beforehand, so they go through it and come. So there usually won't be any relevant question unless they have no time to go through your proposal and just walk in. But that won't happen usually. So, and then you also present. You also present it to your supervisor. So you would be trying to get answers for all the unexpected questions from panel, unlike the non-area audience. But what kind of questions the panel asks, usually the supervisors will kind of prepare you on that.
Sorry, Danielle. Yeah.
I actually I don't agree 100% with your saying that if you haven't put the message across, because you've also got, I guess sometimes you can put your message across, but the panel don't fully, they don't understand maybe or they're not expert enough in your area that they understand what you're trying to say. Okay? I'm not going to use me as an example, but I just feel that, you've just got to, they will ask you sometimes a question to go on.
The other thing is that there's a very high prior probability with academics that they're going to ask a challenging question, regardless of what you say, regardless of how
Yes.
well you say it, because that's what we
That's
do.
what
Right?
we
You
have
question
to-
everything. That's the whole point of research, is to challenge, question, and in some sense, it's a little bit of a test, for students. But as I said before, it's not supposed to be adversarial. It's not supposed to be putting you on the spot and making things difficult. That's just research. That's just academic research. Academics do it to each other all the time, and this is the training grounds to deal with
Sure.
those questions.
Unexpected, I think I just want to clarify, like an unexpected question is not always irrelevant question.
No, sure.
I mean, so, yeah. So we still have to expect something like in any presentation will be something like a challenging question, which is we not expect that. Sure.
Hey, Daniela, I've seen it.
If you say unexpected question, it's still relevant, but it's just unexpected.
I've seen quite a few different presentations that have been challenging for different reasons. And just recently I saw one where there was someone who kept on asking these questions, and it was almost in a condescending tone. I don't want to say that. I'm not going to say what presentation it was or who it was. Needless to say, it was no one in this room. It was almost like they were peppering these questions as a, haha, yes, I know that I'm best. Michael was chairing it, and he was actually doing a very good job of keeping it back on track. And then after they finished, I just tapped Michael on the shoulder, Michael Morgan, who chairs a lot of these presentations, and I said, look, good job for keeping it on track. That was good for sticking up for the student. And he was just saying, yeah, this person just recently got their doctorate, and now they think they're on top of the world and they know everything, and they had a little bit of this syndrome of, because I got to this stage, now I'm going to unleash on this person.
So don't do unto others as they maybe have
That's right,
done
yeah.
to you.
Yeah. Which I don't think that is
Don't. Oh, I wouldn't do it.
I just want to add a point for the confirmation. As long as you can justify everything there in your research, I think that's good, and the rest of the question will be not challenging as much as a suggestion to improve your research.
Okay.
So the important point that you have justification for every step or like major steps in your research and decisions. That's
So as long as you are telling our story, sorry, I forget your name, are telling your story of where you started and how we expand the scope, and then for what reasons we just came back to narrow it down, and it's analytical enough to show some intellectuality basically in the process, it should be fine. Okay.
I think the process is more structured anyhow. The process now, if we're relating to the confirmation panel, is much more structured now.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Lunch ready?
Shall we also pick someone, if there is someone who wants to?
Yeah, next lunchtime seminar is anybody. Yeah, Mark is there, but Mark will give you us a spare. Next room.
As someone standing in the middle, close your eyes.
Anybody wants to do any Mark presentation? So
Yeah, any more presentations?
Free food? Don't get free food unless someone presents.
We are represented.
now.
Is it presenting what now that there is no other one? Presenting the...
No, it's
That's
like
like
just
a
as soon as your mock presentation.
If you're ready with something.
So I think we're modelling this based on the Clayton one, which they generally tend to do, based on me reading their emails, they generally tend to do talks on their research, which is a good thing to talk about too. So if anyone wants to just talk, it doesn't even have to have a conference coming up. If you just want to talk about your research, introduce it, say why you think it's important.
Well, it is honestly, it's very important because I don't know other people's experience, but my experience has been very lonely, and I mean, for me, research is really about communicating with other people. So, and I've got lots and lots of phases that I was totally stuck. The only pair of ears I had was my hubby at home, so I mean, he's very busy as well. So I think if we can have like some sort of casual sessions that we can just discuss and feel comfortable. It's not as formal as you feel that you're presenting, but at least you're discussing it. That'll be good.
Informal's good. Informal's more comfortable than formal.
But this is sort of informal. It's
Yeah,
not very formal. We try to present a few
Honestly,
things.
these two characters, do you think that their presentations were very formal? Oh, were they formal?
It is not at some point, and it's open to anybody who wants to contribute to those points. So it's just an open discussion. Whoever has finished, like Mark was talking just now, so whoever has finished the confirmation and they've got something to add to it, it's just it's open. It's not formal at all.
And is it next week?
No,
Usually once every month. We do it. Unless everybody is interested in presenting something or the other
that's it.
fortnight.
Yep.
And they can have
If next month, and if there is no other person, yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, good.
It's only 5 minutes, isn't it?
No, 20 minutes.
We make this 5 minutes by turning into a panel type discussion. So we just, because we thought we wanted to get everyone together to have another talk, but yeah, it'd be perfectly fine to do one 20-minute talk if you'd like.
20 minutes.
Each.
No.
Just one person presenting. We just
Like the previous one, it's only Peter talked about the good
That's
Friday.
funny. Danny Peter was talking. Yeah, go on.
The previous
Last
lunchtime seminar is only Peter.
Promise I won't talk next time.
Yeah. So and
Oh, no, I love you
it's
talking,
like a
Peter.
30 minutes, 25 minutes.
Just
Yeah,
means I
25
have
minutes,
to
30
Yeah,
minutes
passing
talk,
talk.
and so yeah, it's not always like many people at once.
Yeah.
This month we don't.
We just thought it'd be a good idea to try this out.
We just try.
I thought
I
we
think,
should.
yeah.
and you know sometimes
Even like
talking
a
about
short
research
session,
is
if you have a
boring.
few short ones.
So every now and then we have to switch to something else and see what everybody else needs. So, and that was Peter's idea. It was excellent, and so many people commented on it. Peter.
The only thing I think for long ones is that you feel, because I'm really time poor at the moment, that you would have to feel obligated to actually practice and have it all ready. I know it's a good process, but short ones are better, in that you don't have to give so much time and effort into
Quick
it.
straw poll, did any of you three spend anything more than today working on this presentation?
Yesterday night for half an
spent
hour.
2 minutes
I
on the past 2 weeks ago.
I have to give my
At the bus.
master of procrastination title.
Yes,
So I have to do it.
Yeah, just take it from me first.
No, that's not.